we run forest school here. Hi, I'm Lou, and that over there is Lily Rowe. Today's video has been inspired by a question from one of our viewers who was asking about how to prepare a forest school site. Now, forest school happens in lots of different environments. In an ideal world, we'd all be able to get to a lovely natural woodland with mature trees of mixed diversity, with lots of stuff around to play with. But unfortunately, certainly here in the UK, that's not always possible. And particularly if you're in more urban areas, you might have much more limited spaces. So we thought we'd share in this video 5 tips if you're running forest school out of your own school grounds. So tip 1 is to set up some sort of base camp area. So a place where the whole group can come together around some sort of central communal space, if you like. The most common version of that is to have logs as seats, so a seating circle fundamentally. So logs you might be able to get hold of if you talk to your local country park, or maybe you've got a parent that might be an arboriculturist, a tree surgeon, perhaps someone's having some tree work done in their garden. So it's usually pretty straightforward to be able to source some logs if you've got someone friendly with a chainsaw. Depending on the nature of your site, you may be able to have these sort of left in situ established, or if you're not able to have things left out, you might have to roll them off into the hedgerows or something to kind of keep the space clear when you're not running forest school. You may also want something within the centre, depending on what you're planning to do at forest school. So for example, if you're thinking of having a fire or doing campfire cooking, you might want to establish some sort of fire pit space in the centre of your seating circle. Again, if you're not able to leave things in situ, that might be an actual metal fire bowl or some heat-proof bricks or something that you kind of create your space for your fire and then have to take everything away with you afterwards. As well as establishing your kind of base camp area, you also might want to think about how you establish your boundaries of your forest school site if you're in school grounds, because it might be a space where the children go and play, during play times or in doing other activities during the school day. So depending on what your site is like, that may be necessary to demarc where you want them to be able to freely roam during your forest school session. So that might be done with little flags that you could put out, or even the little cones that you might have in your play equipment, the plastic little cones. However you want to do that, lay a rope down on the grass, just because otherwise, sometimes because it's an area where the children might feel very used to, very secure in, that you can end up with a very dispersed group that will kind of go off across the whole of the school grounds, rather than sort of that sense of community together in a certain space. But yeah, depending on what your grounds are like, you may have to be flexible as to where those boundaries are. Tip 2 is to consider shelter. So big open spaces like playing fields tend to be quite exposed and windy, like it is today. And so people can get colder quicker out in those sorts of spaces. So you might want to think about how you're going to provide some shelter from the wind and from the rain if it was to rain. Now, depending on what your grounds are like, some might have mature trees down the edges or in the corners, like where I'm sitting now, and then it's pretty similar to if you're in a woods. You can rig up a ridge line, you could rig up a tarp shelter, or even like rig up a tarp sort of vertically, so you create like a windbreak if it's protection from the wind you want, so that it's a quick way of getting a group warmed up, or even to keep equipment out of the rain or something like that. If you haven't got any mature trees, then you're going to have to think a little bit more creatively and bring in more materials so that you can create something. So if you're able to leave things permanently in place, you could build some sort of frame that you could then throw a tarpaulin over the top. So you could do that using big long poles. You could dig them into the ground, you could lash them together at its most simplest basic form. That will last you a little while. It would need replacing kind of every few years though. Or, you know, if you've got the funds, or get the PTA or something like that to raise you some funds, you could obviously have something more professionally installed. If you're not able to leave anything in situ, you need a solution that's able to be put up and packed down within the time of your session. So some ways that I've done this in the past is I've made giant tripods, so 2 sets of very tall tripods that can be splayed out, and like again, you can use another pole between the two to create like a ridge line, and then because you've got 2 tripods that are kind of sturdy, you can again throw over a tarpaulin to create a dry space. However, that does mean having to carry the tripods if you're not allowed to leave them on site at all, or they do kind of fold down flat as poles, and then you can like hide them in a hedge or something like that and hope that nobody finds them. Tip 3 is provide loose parts. So in a natural woodland, it's pretty easy. There's all sorts of natural materials lying around and growing, and the seasons change it all the time. So every session you're going to find something new. In a more domesticated environment like a field or a garden, it doesn't change that much, particularly if there's not much diversity around. So that means there might be more effort and creativity required from you as a practitioner to bring in loose parts, natural loose parts, to inspire the children's play. So you might need to bring in poles, sticks, cones, seeds, stones, clay, muds, all of the sort of things you would find in a woodland. You might have to bring them in if you've got a very domestic environment. You might have to go and find landowners who would be happy to allow you, to cut some hazel poles, or to cut some bits of willow, for example, or to gather up materials. Or even you could ask your parents of the school or the setting and see if you've got any parents who work at places like country parks or gardens or nature reserves, where they might have some natural materials that they'd be able to give to the school. Tip 4 is to think about storage. So bearing in mind, if you're bringing in all these extra loose parts, all these natural materials, as well as some of the other sort of man-made equipment like ropes and string and mini beast hunting equipment, all the things that you might have at forest school, then you're going to need somewhere to keep it and keep it securely. So you're going to need some sort of storage area that's lockable so that you can control the access to it. So whether that's a shed in your school grounds, or whether that's a lockable cupboard or a big lockbox or something like that, you're going to need storage. I would recommend also having your storage as close to the area as possible, because if you're lugging a lot of kit in trolleys or wheelbarrows or by hand, that can be a bit tiring, lugging kit all the time. I do it all the time. On this topic of storage, something else I'd mention, it's a little bit different to the area, but it's still very important from forest school perspective, is because forest school happens all year round, having places where you can put all the outdoor clothing and transition in and out of clothing can be really important, particularly for a school where you might have a number of classes going out every week. And if you imagine in wet or cold conditions where you've got, waterproof trousers or dungarees and waterproof coats, and they're all sopping wet, and you've got sets of like 15 of them, you're going to need areas to dry all that, as well as, soggy wet tarps and things. So when you're thinking about storage, also think about like drying areas, whether you've got somewhere under cover with lots of washing lines or something that you can string stuff up. That's really, really helpful when you've got all of that stuff and you've got to dry it out somewhere. Tip 5 is to develop your grounds for nature. So in schools, I have noticed that sometimes the desire to do forest school has actually been the driving force behind making your school grounds more wildlife friendly, and perhaps planting trees, planting hedgerows, letting the grass grow a bit longer in certain areas, so that as well as helping wildlife, it also creates that diversity for children's natural play experiences. So in the UK, you can get free trees as a school from the charity the Woodland Trust, for example. So you can get your pack of trees, and then you can plant them in the school grounds. The children can plant them. So actually doing some of these like conservation type activities could become part of the forest school experience, so that in the future you would have your own woodland. A few things to be aware of with this is, of course, make sure that you have got the authority to start putting things in place with the landowner. If it's not you need kind of landowner consent to be doing that. And also do consider and consult with the whole school environment, if you like, as to where to plant trees, if that's what you're going to do, or where to let the grass grow longer, because obviously school grounds get used for a lot of different reasons, and there might be the sports playing pitches, there might be other clubs or something that use bits of the school, so it's important to do some sort of consultation before you kind of change any areas. Do also remember that native species are going to have much more wildlife value than non-native or exotic species. Also, there might be some exotic species that are considered invasive, and you don't want that because that's going to affect the natural ecology and kind of maybe take over things. There is also something to be aware of in terms of pests and diseases that might be spread through moving plant material or trees or bits of tree from one site to another. So do be very aware of that. Finally, the last thing to think about is also maintenance of the area. So in terms of school grounds, often the maintenance of those is done by somebody else. And if you imagine a playing field, it's very easy maintenance because it's just cut the grass and paint on the sport pitch lines. It's a very sort of low maintenance contract. As soon as you change anything or introduce anything else, like a hedgerow or like planting trees or letting the grass grow long to create a meadow, then that is going to add a level of complexity to the maintenance, and therefore if you're asking somebody else to do that, it could cost you more. So that's something that you would need to think about, whether you're going to ask the existing contractors to maintain what you've created, or whether you're going to do that yourself through volunteers or even through the children doing it at forest school. Regardless of which option you go with, do make sure you communicate with your contractors so that they don't come along and trim all your baby trees once you've planted them, because I've known that to happen more than once. If developing your school grounds is something that you're looking for support with, there are various organisations out there, certainly in the UK, that can help you with that. Often there's a cost or a membership associated with that. There may also be some materials online that you can find. Something that I have on offer for free through my Buy Me a Coffee page is something called the Step Outside pack, which is a really ancient pack that I was involved with writing about 15 years ago. But the final chapter of it is about things to do in your school grounds that might help wildlife, like how do you plant a tree, how do you make a bug box, how do you dig out a pond, all those sorts of things. So if you want to check that out, I'll pop the link in the description below. So there you go, 5 tips for preparing your forest school area if you're in school grounds. Do you have any more tips for working in school grounds? Do let me know in the comment section below. If you've enjoyed this video, do give us a thumbs up and consider subscribing to our channel so you can join us in the woods or in the playing field next time. And thanks for watching. Running forest school in school grounds may need you to bring in natural things that you found. With resourcefulness and creativity, you can plant your own woodlands and head to the trees.